my lovely hosts for a marvelous day. So I had such a good time dancing with everybody. What a wonderful way of being introduced into a conference to come in and dance with fellow disabled people from a different country. So that was just smashing. I've got some stuff running behind me, which I just love you to zone in out on for a while. So while I do my intro, I just let this run. There's some sound. Multimedia wasn't here, put that behind me. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. So we heard from Heidi that we don't have a very strong relationship of our body with the space. Sometimes it feels like it's all through screens. And of course what we're seeing behind me is a screen. But I invite you, as I'm talking and as you're seeing this, to let yourself flow a little bit into what you're seeing there. Underwater, a different kind of interface. I'm sitting here in some ways as an interface designer. My company, the Olympia, is the collective that I lead. We've been around since the mid-90s. And we emerged out of dance technology environments. I was in the same research group with people like Susan Gazelle, who's going to be here, and Helen Paris, and the people from Curious Dance. You know, we had this really yummy, lovely dance and gender, performance and gender research group in London in the mid-90s. So it's been really interesting to see where we've all gone from that. So here I am, sharing with you some of our interface design. I didn't bring any of the experiments that we've been engaged in with sensors or telematic technology because you know so much more about that than I do. I am just the artist end that works on the interface between humans and other humans. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So in the back there is a lot of footage from the Salamander project, underwater project that we're getting to a little bit later in the talk. I'm just letting it run for a little bit more because I think it's nice to start in water. With the image, imagine yourself in water, or just sitting here, feeling the touch of water on you. Feel the pressure of a different atmosphere. Different pressures, different temperatures. What is the affordance of this kind of room? What kinds of engagements happen in a room like this as we're sitting in our rows, as you're sitting with your backs to one another? How different would it be if we were now in a pool, gliding across each other? Or do our different research environments and research sharings tell us about the kind of ways that we engage with one another, that we interact? What kind of communication do we value? It's been great, as I said, to come into this room first and engage in a very different way with people, where we didn't have our backs to one another. We were engaged in very delicate touch with the box on the table, touch through voice with the composer technologists who were working with us as we were giving feedback to one another about where we're supposed to be in space. And then, of course, the touch of beams and sensors on our skins as we were moving. So just try to imagine how far one could take an environment like that, and what would it be to be in this kind of environment in water. That was one of our research questions. I come back to the Salamander project now. You like watching it? Are you zoning out? What did I just say? I'm just going to move on a little bit. We can go back to this one. It's like a 20-minute loop. This was for an installation, so it's an installation loop that went on for a long time. And you could sort of interact with it. But let me get to the actual project. Bye-bye, 13 people. I don't want to say goodbye, actually. I just want to go flow. Okay, here we go. So with Olympias, that's the collective that I lead. And you can hear in my accent, now that I've been here in Germany for a few days, I am of course German, so my accent gets stronger when I'm in Germany, which nice shift in my own language. And so the Olympias is a German reference. It's from Freud's The Sandman, the uncanny, where the concept of the uncanny comes from. In there is this this figure, this woman, the mechanical doll that dances. And that was the beginning of our project. So we're interested in mechanical doll that dances and that becomes a projection surface for all the men in the story. Anybody read the Sandman? Is that still something you read? One? No one else read it? Do you know the Sandman? 2, 3. Alright, clearly not quite any longer base reading. It's a short story. And then Freud wrote an analysis of this short story. And in there is this dancing doll that all the men in the story are in some relation to. The core character in the story falls in love with her and imbues her with life through his desire. Of course, she is a mechanical doll, and she will not come to life. And so that's sort of the uncanny origin at the heart of the story. And I think it says a lot about our interest in dance technology and how we can mimic, engage, play with, project life and engagement with one another. So if you haven't read the Sandman, I encourage you to read this. I think it's really interesting as a way of thinking about what it is that we're doing when we are engaged in that human-machine interface that you mentioned. So we are the Olympias, and what that means is that we are engaged with projection surfaces. We are engaged with what people see when they see me here in my wheelchair. What do people see when they see someone who has the facial features of someone who dances? What do we see in each other, and what do we see across differences? Whether these differences are racialized, through disability, through gender, or in any other way. And how do we see each other? What is the interface between humans? And how can various kinds of technologies allow us and help us to play at that interface? Does that make sense as a question? Interface between humans, and how can we use technologies to tweak that? And that's the core question we're going to look at. Does everybody get how the Olympias stuff comes? Anyway, don't have time to tell this whole story, so I'm not then I just say, think living gods. No, Olympias without the Y, living gods. That's the short story if I may. All right, so here I'm going to show you the very first project, the one that started it for us. I was working in Wales, in Britain, and I was working for about 4 years, regularly every week, with a group of mental health system survivors, psychiatric survivors, people with very significant experiences of mental health difference, people who have been homeless, who have been in psychiatric institutions, who have been imprisoned. Lots of different people with significant experiences who would look different in public. You know, who, if we were here, you would mark us visually as different, even though mental health differences doesn't necessarily present itself on the external presentation of the body. All of us were marked deeply by mental health difference. So we try to come up with a way of sharing our beauty and our calmness in a world where mental health difference was equated with psychos, with being out of control. So none of us wanted to perform in a conventional way. We were doing dances, choreographing, we had lovely little things that we couldn't show, but we all knew that we would be quite worried if we were to try to show these dances in public. Because what if there were a misstep? What if we lost the plot? What if the fact that our medications meant that we couldn't think in long chunks of time, we couldn't remember things? What if that meant that we forgot what we're supposed to be doing? What if we were out of control in public? Right? That was a real issue for so many of the people in the project. So we looked towards technology, towards video, as a way of sharing ourselves differently and of creating a different interface between us and the public. That public that kept projecting the cycle on us, kept projecting being out of control on us. So this is like, as I say, early 90s, mid-90s, 94, something like that. So for us this is cool. I know we're on quite a bit more from now, but hey, it was cool at the time. Our first installation was in a shopping mall. What was also really important for us is that this does not just happen in a high art environment, it's a gallery somewhere, in some museum somewhere, where only a bunch of fairly educated upper class people come to. We come from a small little village in Wales, and we needed to have access to people like us. You know, we are thinking of our work as political, engaged in system change in the general public, not just out there in a small gallery environment. So we went into the shopping mall in Swansea, in Wales, and we had 3 huge projection surfaces, which was really kind of hard to get at the time because, as I say, 94 it was early. We had these big projection surfaces, and you could come into this room from the shopping mall. So people would come with their shopping bags in hand, and they could enter into this dark room. They would see, as they entered the room, they would see our write-up that we are mental health system survivors with significant experience of mental health difference. And some of us decided to give diagnoses, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever. People could come and enter, and then you would have a choice. You could watch us engage, not in our choreography, not in our moving about big way, but in a fairly quiet meditation sequence. We were lying on the floor. We had close-ups of our faces. That's the images that you see behind me here. We were lying on the floor, we were breathing, and you would hear a voice taking us on a dream journey. So we were breathing, and there were small eye movements. You could diagnose, you could look and diagnose our difference or the effect of our dream journeys on our giant, huge, beautiful, glowing faces. Or you could choose to lie down and join in. Okay, those are the 2 options. Or any options that you wanted to take, but those are the sort of main ones that we designed in this particular interface between difference and the public. Would you just let yourself go, relinquish control and go for the relaxation sequence and find yourself basically in the same vulnerable position that the people on the screens are in? Or would you try to see, how are these people mad? What are the signs of madness here? Right? And that seemed to us a really interesting way of putting the pressure on. Pressure is something I think is quite important in the kind of work we do here. How do we pressure what is already out there? How do we pressure the regimes of representation? How do we pressure politics? How do we create change? In our own ways, in our poetic, creative, artistic ways. So that's the pressure that you were under as you were coming into this installation with your shopping bags. Many people just dropped the shopping bags at the entry of the room, took a bolster, took a pillow, laid themselves down, and stayed in there for an hour. Because that's actually what we all need. Whether we say well or not, most of us need to hang out for a while and just chill. So that was a really important insight from this very first Olympias project. Getting people to chill out with one another, getting people to hang out is one of the most important things you can do as artists. And that is sort of the baseline for most things, for most engagement that will happen afterward. So like on the first day of the Lovely Dance workshop, there was this moment when we were watching the individual performances at the end. And I was just chilling out. I was sitting next to one of the participants who was using a wheelchair, and she put her hand in mine. And so for each of the little performances that we were watching, we held hands. And I was so aware of the sensitivity, of the touch, of the way that both her and my touch was responding to the dance and the music that was unfolding in front of us. Every time it was time to clap, we would take our hands apart and we would clap. And then she would slide her hand right back into mine again. And so we had this very little dance. A little dance that was all about relaxation. If we'd been uptight and forwardly focused, this would not have happened. But to me, that was one of the most significant dances that I've watched, enabled by the dances that were happening in front of us, which was in this room, and I think it was the group that you were working with. It was very sweet. A little dance about relaxation, about being in a place that affords a different way of engaging our sensorium. So that became a really significant component of the interface design. I use that name. I don't think use that name outside this room in this particular conference, but I like it. You know, the kind of interface design that I'm interested in. So that was my project. On the next one was the mappings. I'm now in New Zealand, and I would, on a different interface, this interface was also about different differences. Disability was one of them, but the main one is about being dead or being alive. This was working in a hospice with people in the last months of their lives. A lot of my work was in those kinds of environments. And it was also, this is too fast, but never mind. This was also at the interface of Pakeha, European incomers into New Zealand, and Maori, indigenous people of New Zealand. So in this hospice, we work with people creating these memory images. Again, it's a fairly conventional community arts methodology. Memory images, when you work with someone who's dying, create with them something that they want to hand on to their loved ones. So really, it's a very honorable task for us to work in community, to help people to hand on something that's important to them, to allow people to create a container, be it a dance, a piece of writing, an image that they can hand on to whoever it is that they want to give something to. Something that many of us do are not claiming any kind of, not always about innovation. A lot is about support, offering support to one another. So we created these images. So this, for instance, is someone whose ring got broken in chemotherapy because it wouldn't get off otherwise. The fingers had swollen, and so the ring got broken. We made these photos, and then with one another. Again, this was quite a while back, and not many of us that had Photoshop on our computers at that time. It's like a big deal to be able to change the colors or something on screen. Hey, this is like before, I don't know, it sounds like it was before you were born, but that's not actually true. It's not been long ago, right? It's not been long ago that we could do that kind of stuff in community media. So here we are in the hospice, and we're tweaking colors, and people go, whoa, cool. Because we're talking a very rural environment, you don't necessarily know that you can do that kind of stuff. Or perhaps many of us, but not to some. So we were tweaking the colors, and we made the ring whole again. That is painting gold over it. We created a lot of images like that. But we also, it was a dance project. And so we put these images into a wider environment, and one that specifically allowed us to think about death and life as a form of interface, as a form of contact. So we created a film, which I'm going to show you in a minute, just so it's a little break from each other. And this film is something that we showed inside a huge gallery in Dunedin, New Zealand, which is on the southern tip of the South Island. It's very near to Antarctica. The film is shown in multiple locations in this big gallery, and people came to our dance performance expecting to see a bunch of people dancing for them. That's not right. That's what we still expect when you hear dance performance. You want to see people dancing. Again, it's a dance technology performance, so all you saw the videos, and then you were invited into a circle. So you wouldn't see anybody dancing, but you would be invited into a circle, and based on the stories that you hear in the video, you'd be led in a dance. You all were dancing. You were the dancers. You would develop the dance as you're entering this particular environment. That is for me an interface design as well. What does it mean to translate a dance created by people who have at that moment already passed, who have died, how to recreate that dance through the various translatory mechanisms of video, sound. You hear the sound of an albatross flute, there's an albatross bone that's being played. You hear that running. What does it mean to enter into a different time and to touch across death? So these are some of these tweaked images and the stories that people infused into those images. And here's the video. Show a little bit of that. Oops. Did that right? No, I didn't do that. Sorry. I'm fine. There you go. Those little maggots. There's a heart under
The canoe landed on the beach.
The food baskets fell out and became white boulders.
And then later, it re-emerged as eggs, leaving the two hills slanting down to the water.
What does it mean to watch this right now?
Take time to smell the roses.
And what does it mean to see this as inspiration for your own movement, not only to be dancing as it? And I can find a different pressure in and I'm going to
Cheers and bodies became
nice
movement.
The giant's heart is still beating.
Tanifa.
Tanifa is a water dragon, spirit in the rivers.
The Tanifa's claw appears. The Tanifa's nature.
After radiotherapy, the ring is around broken. Brokenness isn't the end of everything.
So think about this in relation to old and new technologies of connection, old and new interfaces. Think about different kind of cultural technologies of connection. The albatross bone as a way of connecting us to different realms, connecting us to bird colonies, connecting us to the ancestors, connecting us across there. So those were some of the questions that were really interesting to me as someone who was using, at that point, available technologies in a community dance environment. What are the uses that we make of our technologies and how do we honor different kinds of cultural heritages, both Celtic storytelling, Pakeha, and local stories, Maori. And now we're going back to the Salamander project, which is the one in the water. We could just have all gone to the thermal bath, some kind of famous thermal bath around here. And you know that, don't you? I always go bath. I always go bathing with people. So we just do that. So many dance technology conferences, I just go off and go swimming together. So I like it like that. So it's nice to shake things up. So here we go, Salamander project. This was a picture from Sweden. This is one of these beautiful Roman thermal baths in Sweden, where, this is like heaven for someone like me. I got paid to be in a Roman thermal bath. We had this place to ourselves. We had these tiny underwater cameras that we would put at the bottom of the pool, and we spent days developing our technique in swimming underwater. Didn't you? You've seen this in Barcelona, didn't you? So it's a little bit of it, because we also went swimming off the beaches of Barcelona for that conference. Barcelona Beach, all of us disabled people going up into the ocean together. So it's pretty fun. And it starts again with community media, with what is available. So the issue of what is available, what is easily available, what is cheap, is very, very important. So this project began when One of the people in the collective, Neil Marcus, a performance artist who's spastic, and you saw earlier in the video, he needed to exercise more. So often it's about exercise. Like when we were dancing this weekend, so these last few days, for many of these people, it's one of the very few times that they actually get to move their bodies. You know, like we were talking about that, how there is no dance therapy, there's no movement, there's no real exercise in that environment. So sometimes mobilizing one's back is utterly important. Stretching is like core to the first level of engagement, because that's the way in. And that's also the way that it usually makes sense of these kinds of activities for the funders. Right? That's how we get the accessible transport that gets people into this room. So the politics of how we engage with one another is really central there. So Neil needed to exercise more, and he loves performing, he's a dancer. So he bought a super cheap underwater camera, which these days are available for $20, $30. And that's what we had for the whole of the project. We just had a bunch of those cameras. And we get these wonderful photos that people always want to put into exhibitions. So you get these questions. Oh, you've got these really, really beautiful disabled people images. Can I have them for exhibitions? And I'm like, they're less than 1 megabyte. You can't. You know, they're just not big enough. They're community here. They're not for that. It's like you can go and swim with us. We're not going to be blown up huge on the wall. We can't, because it's a different kind of way of thinking about what art is and where art happens. So this art happens in the pool with one another. And you can see I'm basically just trying to get people to go swimming with me. That's how it goes. It's my job. That's my job. I'm going to talk a little bit about the basis that informs so much of our work, and I think informs a lot of the work that the Meta Body Project will also do in the world. It's important to keep these things in mind as we are creating our own little utopias, our own little places where maybe some of these oppressions lose their hold, but they're still very much with us. Some of the core issues that inform us are isolation. How many of us are isolated from one another? This actually doesn't just apply to disabled people. Yeah. Everybody, but specifically to disabled people. I'm sitting right now on the telephone number that one of the people in the project gave to me. I am a woman, and this was a young man who's clearly looking out for partners. He knows everybody in that particular project. He's met everybody. I bet there's other. Did any of you get the telephone number too? Did you get the telephone number from them? I'm not going to go. Yeah, right? Did you? Absolutely, right? I mean, it's so important. We do not acknowledge that these kinds of encounters are some of the only ways that they can meet potential sexual partners. You know, it's not about coming here and dancing. It's about mixing with other people, getting out of a very restrictive institution where you will not meet anybody new. So you meet someone new, it doesn't really matter who it is. I'm sitting on the telephone number right now. It's very common that this is about sexual contact. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that in some environments, and this is very much the case here, it's about springing people out of an institution for just a few hours. So that's quite a responsibility we have to put something there, but also knowing that it's not really about the project, it's often just about the meeting one another, having fun, going on a date. Lack of access, it's a huge one here, isn't it? It's very hard. I mean, yesterday in the hail, and I was hailing like last night, and hardly any of the restaurants are accessible, so I'm outside a dinner kebab place, like a dinner place, and I have to knock on the window for them to bring out some stuff to me. You know, that's just, all the coffee, every time I want a coffee, unless I go to the men's, I have to kind of usually knock on the window and get me the coffee. That's just how it is. It will be hard to imagine living here. Lack of touch, though. I mean, once you live here, of course, you do know what the accessible pathways are, and you can get what you need, at least within the life, within the affordances of disabled life in any one environment. I think as you travel more, you will find that the affordances for disabled life are very different in different places. I moved from Germany to the US because of the American Disabilities Act that allows me citizenship rights. I would not be a professor in this country. Most of the dance departments that I visit, that try to invite me, turn out to still be completely inaccessible. I would not have my profession if I had stayed in this country. I would most likely be, I don't know when I'd be in one of those institutions, but I might be, depending on where I was born, the child's at the floor, and that's where we are. Another one is the lack of an aesthetics that reflects us back. I think that's a really important one for many disabled people. We do not often see work that is initiated by other disabled people. Of course, there's no qualitative difference, huge qualitative difference between those of you who identify as non-disabled and those of us who are. We're actually just humans together. And yet, some of us have very different experiences from others. So, for instance, the experience of being able to navigate space easily is one that is hugely different. One where we're allowed to show our emotional insights without being placed in the category of madness or finding oneself potentially institutionalized is a huge difference. So showing work that is led by fellow disabled people is an important political act. Being aware that there is work that is led by other disabled people is an important political act. And at this point, my presentation originally wasn't just going to be about Olympia's data, but since we don't have internet access, the only work that I have on my own computer is, of course, my own work, right? Makes sense. But I do want to just briefly mention, for those of you who are particularly interested in international disability culture, I want to mention some other companies, just so you can look them up when you have internet access somewhere. So please, if you work at all with people with cognitive differences, like some of the people that we work with here, please look at Amanda Baggs, B-A-G-G-S.
You know what, after we will put this online
Yeah.
at the conference website,
Okay.
all of this information.
Great. I just put that down already, so people have that just in my language, and I put that there as well. It's so important to me that we see people who are autistic, people who have these differences leading their own work. I myself have many differences, but I'm not cognitively different.
There's a very well-known YouTube video of Amanda Baggs, isn't it?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yes, and one of the collaborators here, Erin Manning, she writes intensely about it in her book, Always More Than One.
Yeah.
And she does a wonderful write-up of it. You should read that if you're all interested in philosophy and difference. That is a beautiful piece. The other company I want to mention is Back to Back Theatre Company from Australia. Just look at just those two gives you such an interesting sense of what is possible. And then both of those projects I think are really interesting in relation to what I've witnessed here over the last few days. It is about communication and interface. Okay. Pain is catastrophe, that pain is the worst thing that can happen. I'm someone who lives with pain, and you will see, I mean, those of you who've been here, who've witnessed me over the past few days, I will take myself out. My time is always limited. After a few hours, I will go and lie down. It's not a catastrophe. It's a living, it's a different path. And those that I'm talking with, I speak a lot about what it means to move around Weimar and to see this town with a different sensibility. So we were just sharing about the Nietzsche archive and what happened there. And so much of my way of being in space is a form of done study practice, where I'm processing what is happening to me in a slightly different way from somebody who might find themselves less restricted in the way they're moving around. Lastly, the main disability of depression is an immobility of spirit. And I leave that to you to think about what that means to you. What is immobility of spirit? And we answer by going swimming together. That's one of the ways to answer. To enter into this different trance medium. What happens when we cut off our air together? We enter into a very different life world. When we abandon ourselves to each other, when the affordances of life become quite different, when we can only be on this different planet for a short period of time, and there's something very heightened. When you cut off your air, all kinds of fantastic stuff happens inside our bodies, right? This is an interface with our biological being, our hormones, our endorphins, our erotic potential. We switch. So these are the particular strategies that the Olympias are developing as ways of dealing with disability oppressions. What's most important is artfulness, poetics, being in the world. We work through veils and touches and fractured storytelling. We hardly ever tell any story straight. We do not own our specific disability labels. We are telling about our life experiences in multisensory ways. We say no to re-victimization. We will not name what it is that's going on with us or tell the stories that happen to us. But we also say no to the overcoming individual. And we will share that there is pain and struggle involved in what we're doing. No one's coming out on top easily here. We're in it together. We hold secrets. Even in the little bit of hope that you've seen already, you see that it's not about a clear communication. You do not know what all the stories were that were shared by dying people in New Zealand. You do not know what the stories were of people in the water in Sweden, Australia, Germany, US, UK. You get little glimpses of us, but we're not. We're holding a lot close. We're holding a lot close in this project. And your secrets will be safe. We create precarious community, like the community that we created here in the last few days. These little touches, the hand-holding, the moments of dancing with one another. Of course, we were not in the community. There is really quite a significant life gap between this German woman who's now privileged and able to travel the world and the German disabled women and men that I was so happy to dance with over these last few days. There isn't really community. Our life differences are hugely different, and yet there are small moments of connection. We're looking at a little together, talking about Freya, we're talking about beautiful, like the green wheelchair shield that one of the guys had, it's gorgeous. We just have these little exchanges. We do collect the telephone numbers, yes, and we live that little fantasy of erotic contact just for that moment. I'm not saying no, I take the number. It's okay. We play with that. We know that this is a form of disability community. We work with duration, pleasure and pain, going under together in this particular project, or in other ways creating pressure on ourselves is part of our performance methodology. We're performance artists. Duration and pain is part of what we do. Those of you who do performance art, these are old requirements. We put pressure on ourselves. Performance art. And we reach for grace. And again, I leave that open for you to interpret whatever that means for you. Grace. I'll show you a few more images from the project. A lot of the people in this particular project identify as indigenous as well, both from Turtle Island, which is the US, both North and South America, but also different Asian countries, Australia. Myself, I identify as indigenous. What does it mean to think as someone who's indigenous about the relationship to the elements? What does it mean to be a settler and think about the elements and the world? The elements that connect us. What does it mean to make waves together? To touch ourselves in the water? Here's an image of one of the performances. This is in Texas, weirdly enough. And you see a lot of people preparing other people to go into the water. So there's a ritual aspect often to this project. We're creating rituals together. And even the tiny little warm up I did the other day has this feeling of a ritual closing, like this little bit of that. Humans respond really well to rituals. We like doing. So here people are preparing other people to go into the water. The water's really cold. It is in Texas, but somehow that swimming pool was not heated. It was freaking cold. So people were helping other people energetically to get ready to enter into that different realm. And then when people came out of the water again, they dried them off, wrapped them up in towels, held them. So literal touch is really important here too. The interface between ourselves and the world we live in. Lying on a rock, this is in Sweden, an island of Gothenburg, where I was choreographing a salamander piece on Spin Dance Company just this last summer. It was very lovely, very fun. We were thinking a lot about human and non-human environments and the affordances that our environment offers us. what is unknown. Some of us think about elements that are not open to us. Where can we go? How can we enable each other to enter? Where can none of us enter? And what's mysterious and beautiful about that? Okay, to close my talk, I'm going to talk about one more project. I'm going to just show a video, I'm going to talk a lot about it. It's one that's important to me to share here, as we're in Weimar, as we're here at Bauhaus. Yesterday I was at the Nietzsche archive and heard that from the balcony of the archive, the level where Nietzsche himself was lying and dying in 1900. From that place you can look out and see the crematoria of Buchenwald. And I want to just acknowledge that connection in this amazing place, in the Bauhaus, in this temple of avant-garde culture, where just only 10 kilometers away we have the concentration camp of Buchenwald. So the piece I'm going to share with you is about a Holocaust memorial in Berlin. You guys know that place? Buchenwald was a different concentration camp from some of those that, let's say, people were killed. But it was very clear to me over the last 2 days, dancing with you guys, how many of us, how the vast majority of us would have been killed, would not have been here, if some of what happened very, 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 very near from here, if that would have taken over the world. You know, these were the kinds of places where the people we were dancing with were killed, where those interfaces between different kinds of beings were so radically disjuncted, where we were killed. So I'm going to show you how we, as Olympias, try to address some of this. And I'm not going to talk about it too much afterwards, but you'll get a sense of how pressure, interface, engagement between different kinds of people, how that is core to our methodology. So you'll hopefully find many of the themes that I'm mentioning here repeated again. Think about pressure and grace. Think about your sensorium. Think about what it would be like to be in this. This is another participatory performance where there's no one outside. There's no observer position. If you come to this show, you're in it. You're in it. You're in it. Your bodies are in. Here we go. we needed to create a new sculpture, a memorial of life, an accessible place of commemoration and assembly, a practice of peace. May I touch you? May I touch you? Go through the gate. Please lie down if you are comfortable with this, and place your head on this person's belly, the soft part. Breathe. Relax. Give your weight to the person beneath you. Feel the small movements of life. Listen to the sounds our bodies make. See what emerges. Feel the wave of breath running through this brain of humanity. And in the spirit of community media, I of course brought our goodies, and they are always for free. So I bought a whole bunch of DVDs. The big one with the blue cover has the journey that you just saw on there. There's one of the red ones which has the New Zealand one on it, and there's a few of the really old CDs of the old Tracks project. I think it's the one after that. There's a few of those. I bought 2 books of a book that came out recently that's all about studying disability arts and culture. So those of you who are interested in disability-led work by disabled artists, in there are all these names and lots of exercises about them. So I am aware that often I am one of the few voices that you'll hear from this particular culture. So we try to be very aware of handing on this culture. We're meeting each other in places like this, in the beautiful workshops that we have in the morning. With that, to share these insights from the rest of disability culture with you. This is how we end. We do not just need positive images, we need depth and heft and presence, and what can dance technology offer us in this. Thank you so much.
I'm particularly interested in your position, and thank you for the work that you have been doing. Your position in relation to the aesthetics and the representation of disability, and how you can pursue certain strategies of participation instead of showcasing difference. And also, I think it's sometimes an entrapment. It happened to me in the United States that the Latino, Hispanic, gay, blah, 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 all the labels that you can get. And then get funds, because you are actually doing that. But at the same time, it becomes some kind of entrapment. And how do you do that in the curatorial environment?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's lovely. And I think there's two ways in which one could go about answering. One is that, of course, in disability culture then, it's actually still quite rare that we just get to hang out with one another. And I love these little moments where we do get to hang out with one another. Often in environments that are not directed by us. Often, hanging out in the doctor's office even. If I'm traveling, I will find some people there, and I just want to go and hang out. We just spoke earlier, right? Some of us were outside during break, and we were talking about how we are not born into those chosen families. As disabled people, as queer people, we are not born into those kinds of environments. It takes a while for us to find our tribe. So finding our tribe, having these videos along, having them out, checking out in with one another, making sure that people know that there are other people who are doing this kind of work is really important. So there's this sort of a way of building culture that's still very, very important to us. So the ghetto question is often such a place of life for so many of us who have never found other people with similar kind of differences. Particularly in a culture like this, which keeps so many disabled people in an institution, where you literally cannot get out and about, you cannot participate in public space in quite the same way. So that, and in those places, having a disability culture workshop is super important. Just to be in contact with one another and seeing more variety. At the same time, I think as an aesthetic strategy for the wider world, my answer is participation. My answer is, yes, sensuous engagement, seduction. The stuff I show you is quite nice, isn't it? Kind of nice. Kind of nice. I can show it anywhere. People love it. It's just so nice. There's a reason why people ask us for these photos. There's a reason why people invite this kind of work. It is political work, but it's not work that hits you over the head. Instead, it tends to invite you to go swimming with us. Now, that's a much nicer strategy, a much better strategy to ensure that we actually can find community with one another. It is important to me to reach beyond our own limit. That interface between public and our own space is hugely important, and participation is core to that. And I think so much of the highly seductive strategies that we're developing in dance technology are core to that kind of work. so many of the sensitive work that so many of us have been working on for decades, so many of us are putting that in public. Right? How many of us have played in the streets of Berlin or somewhere, you know, some of these really exciting center environments where you can play with stuff. You know, we get drawn in that way. To me, it's important that there's something else to it, that there is that pressure, that there's the political pressure. So we're not just playing. There's some kind of sense of finding something hard in there, like Holocaust for sake, right? I mean, that's can't get much harder than that. But it still is a pleasurable activity. So how can we play with that dual focus, pressure and pleasure together? Because that's for me an important political point. What else? Also, it's very fun to hang out in the pool and see all of us doing that. And then lifeguards tend to get really freaked out because there's all these wheelchairs standing by the side of the pool. There's hearing aids lying around. There's like people with colostomy bags that I've never seen in the pool before. There are people, transgender people who might be using a bathroom that to their lifeguard seems weird. You know, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff. People in public see us having fun and go, ooh, is that safe? Is that okay? Should disabled people be going under like that? We had so many people come up to us and say, God, hold your breath and go under. Just because we have to be disabled, we're not allowed to go under. That's so common to hear that. So there is a real dangerous edge to some of this really pleasurable stuff I'm sharing with you. Even in that beach of Barceloneta that I was mentioning earlier, we had some really angry with us for taking poor disabled people out into the water, how dangerous that would be. You know, like people get really quite worried about us and danger zones. That's fun. Pressure's good. Any other questions about this stuff?
I think there are many things you said which are truly important for this project. For example, the initial idea you were sharing about the interfacing between people and how we are already kind of interface. We want to treat that existing interface, like the existing perceptions, where we distance from each other, which belong to very long traditions of how perception is engineered, and how we are kind of assuming windows of this distancing and fixation. And then the different kinds of ways of dealing with that, which are so infinite in a way. We can deal with that just through touching each other in new ways. We can deal with it. The project is actually exploring all these levels. I never stop reminding so that we should not just play with highly sophisticated digital mediations, but even just moving in new ways, through touching in new ways.
Right. Very important to the people in the project. The people in the last 3 days who were dancing, the fact that they were touching one another was really important. And that they were touched not just by others. We sometimes forget how important that is. How many of us don't get touched? So some of the people we were dancing with, right? Quite a few of you were in the group with us. Like the fact that there were people holding hands and were touching each other, and it wasn't just the elder touching them. It's massive. So I bet they remember that very well.
And then the many problematic political borderlines where we should at least deal, which we're not always aware. Sometimes practices and discourses become very abstract. We don't always take into account the many problematic instances that we reinstate actually with much of the behavior that we reproduce. At times because we may have embodied limits to such an extent that we have lost awareness of the limits completely. Of course, for people who have to fight daily with the normative limits which are presenting continuous difficulties for life, and it's more obvious when you're. I think each of us is outside normative systems in different ways. It's question of degrees. Some of us are more or less in conflict with more or less levels of normativity. And the more you are in resonance with what is normative, the less you are aware of the limits it's imposing.
I agree. And becoming aware of that moment of symbiosis, to use another word from our title here, right? The symbiosis, how much we rely on one another, the infrastructures with which we create community for one another is so important. If we think about, again, not all of you were there, and it's interesting, right? Why the distinction between the disability dance workshops and the conference? I mean, how much fun would it be if we were all in a room together? Right? It was interesting. I'm just noticing that.
Yeah, I just like one tag of what Jaime said is, how much that difference is visible. I think it's something. The difference is visible.
Yeah.
The visibility, because since like we build really well to know cognitively that we are all in this kind of borderline edge of having our own quirks and differences, but how much that becomes obvious or different that then it cannot be. It's impossible to normalize it in the context of a swimming pool or in the context of the academia or anyway.
Well, it's really interesting when it does get more normalized. I think that's fascinating. So Erin's work, you mentioned Erin Nunning, and her work with DJ Savarese, who's an autistic self-advocate, that does push the limits of academia in a really interesting way, because their laboratory isn't just bringing in a community member, it is creating a level playing ground as far as and as extent as possible in an academic environment. What would it mean to have places that are where ownership of projects is equally led? So Erin's project there is really cool to me. Erin DJs. I think we should read about it. What does it mean to distribute agency in different ways? What would it mean to have couches in a room? What would it mean to have someone like Renee yesterday? To have Renee lead us in a moment of sensitivity, someone who seemed really aware of very minute shifts in air currents, and sometimes in the sound patterns. You guys remember Renee? Right? I mean, there seemed such sensitivity, and I didn't have enough time with him to really work out what the differentiations of his perceptions are, but I'm very clear that they are there. It seems that different textures speak really differently to him. So what if he were to lead us in a workshop about sensing difference? That would be cool. He's not able to do that given the structures that we have. He probably would take a long time doing it. But what if we took 3 hours and just follow Renee touching, remember how he touches the clock with his tongue? See now? Touches things. That's just interesting to me. I find that aesthetically fascinating. And I enjoy hanging around that kind of environment. Not all of us get to do that very often. But it's really interesting when we try to let ourselves be led by different voices and stories. Yes, Maria. Yes. Hi.
I'm really interested in this context of the underwater space that you're talking about, and this idea of not being able to perceive as importance, because we would usually think about that as like a limitation. Right? So I wonder if you can speak more about that space as containing affordances for different modes of operating.
Yeah. Well, you can't talk. That's kind of helpful. It's really, really hard to talk when you're going underwater. It's not going to work really well. So it just cuts out that whole, the fastness and the speed of speaking work. A lot of people in this project, their main mode of communication is not talking, or is very, very slow talking. Like in the Jody to the Holocaust Memorial, when we have Neil's voice, and then the transcripts of the voice appear after the voice appeared. So you kind of get to play a little bit with your patience. If you're normally speak half person, then you deal a little bit with impatience. Oh, what does it say? And then you read the line. Right? Underwater, this is of course even more heightened because there's no voice communication. If you're in this workshop for a fairly what feels like a fairly significant amount of time, and it might be short, you know, it's not like we can all hang out in water forever, we can get cold or something, or whatever. Our sensorium gets overloaded really quickly because we're also upside down. But for what feels like a significant amount of time, talking is not the point. We're not chatting. We're literally touching, going under, making photos, swimming off the camera. So that's kind of an important affordance, you know, to just get into a non-normative space where you can't even rescue yourself in a place of speaking. Whereas in this room, we will always rescue ourselves in a place of speaking, right? And it's just who we are. It'd be really hard to hold silence in for half an hour. You could try it, that's just not going to happen. So it's interesting when you switch up the rules of the environment in a way that doesn't feel restrictive. When you do a punitive environment, you want to do that would be boring. And now no one's allowed to talk for half an hour. That would be really stressful, and you would hate me, and that would just be so boring. But if we go into a different environment, it would be fun to switch up our sensoria. It gets more seductive, it gets more interesting. You have a lot of more space to reflect on your own boundaries. Maybe you don't want to show your body in a bathing suit. Maybe you've got a lot of, maybe there's a lot of fears. You just encounter yourself in a really interesting way, and then encounter others in a really interesting way too. It doesn't always have to be swimming pools. That was just one project, right? You know, it's not my whole career is not about like swimming with people. Although it feels like that sometimes. But you do a lot of that kind of stuff, whatever it is, you know, hanging out in different kind of public environments.
Okay, if there's one final question, maybe?
Yeah?
So always when I got these questions, why there are cameras in the swimming pool? Because, these are maybe security media. All the people they go in, he wants to have the feel, the movement with the element, and they get in water meditation, maybe like this. There's a camera in the crowd, and it looks at what the people do, and maybe there's a little break, or it's this, the background he wants to get more information about this.
Well, actually, we are holding the camera. So the camera is, there's no photographer. There's not one person who makes a photo. This little sheet camera gets handed around from person to person. So anybody clicks the person, they can't really see anything. It's not like you're underwater. It's not like a highly technically controlled environment where you actually have goggles on and see what's in something. It's like click, click, click. It gets handed around. So all the photos we saw, there's no photographer, it's just the Olympias. It's just a project. The reason why we have the cameras is because it is a political project. It's about sharing it with the wider world afterwards. It's never just about our experience. We also do a lot of stuff that's just experiential. This is, of course, an art life project. You can work out that we're all friends, and these are people. They are all over the world by now. It's just basically Olympias is whoever wants to be associated. We have company members around the globe. It's not a company, it's a collective, whatever. It's like a hanging out. It's a hanging out art life space. And we set up situations like this, encounter situations. But we always capture what we're doing. We always are aware that what we're doing is transgressive in our shared public space, and it needs to be shared outside our context. Hence, we're getting grants, making free DVDs, and handing out to people. And this is a very important part of handing it on. Of course, it's all online at this point. The CDs or the DVDs are of a slightly different, earlier tech moment, when we're still, and so many classrooms were not networked. Which this one isn't, right? There we go. This classroom isn't networked, so yeah, it's one of them. So there's still plenty of those around, and so we're handing them out so that people can share some in different environments. But it's really important that it's not just an interior project. That might be really fun too, and we do that as a kind of technique development. We have a lot of workshops where we're just engaging in somatic sensitivities of one another. That would be a workshop, a technique session, but that's different from a performance. And these are performances. And people see that we make the photos. And they're always worried about that as well. I mentioned earlier about lifeguards being worried about us going under. People are also worried about the photos and who's vulnerable, who's a vulnerable subject. But if you get worried about us photographing each other, what does it say about whom you designate the label vulnerable to? Does that make sense? So what does it do? Even if you get worried about us, you have to negotiate what it is that you're worried about. Because we will throw it back at you. We will ask, what exactly are you worried about? What about the situation makes you worried? We engage the guards and all these people in our project. They will become part of it. Eventually they usually go, I know there's a photo as well, but, you know. So, and sometimes the bars and swimming pools, so this happens. Can't go swimming everywhere, because sometimes we get it here that we can't do this work with disabled people. But we try, because we use the project. But the fact that there's images that come out and that can be shared in a wider framework like this is very important. And a lot of these photos found their way into the world through Facebook. Who of you have my Facebook friends? Yeah, you are. Okay, you see loads of these, right? Hundreds. But you have hundreds of beautiful photos of disabled people and other allies, queer people, trans people, all kinds of people who've been underwater with us. Where is that coming from? Oh, that's a gallery installation that we have with this. Yeah, so we share these to Facebook, and lots of people make those photos their profile photos. Because A, they're beautiful, and B, they're also very, very unusual. So it's quite interesting to see who uses them as a profile photo for a while. So that there are like waves in this particular Olympias project when people from multiple different continents all had a salamander photo as their public pool photo on the world pool of Facebook. It's fun. You know, we find our publics where they are. Facebook is one of our publics.
Okay, I'd like to thank you
Thank you.
for this really key